Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in South Florida, it's time for South Florida Business Radio. Now, here's your host.
Lee Cantor here, another episode of South Florida Business Radio, and this is going to be a good one. But before we get started, it's important to recognize our sponsor, Diaz Trade Law, your customs expert. Today on South Florida Business Radio, we have Sam Nimah with TriVent Healthcare. Welcome, Sam.
Hey, thanks, Lee. How are you this afternoon?
I am doing well. I'm so excited to learn what you're up to. Tell us about TriVent Healthcare. How are you serving folks?
Well, we are a unique, one-of-a-kind company. We operate inside of hospitals. We work and partner with hospitals to care for their ventilated patients who've had a tracheostomy. So they are typically the most complex patients in the hospital, and we help them liberate from the ventilator.
So how did this idea come about?
Well, it was started about 30 years ago by a respiratory therapist. They simply needed a better solution for this patient population. These patients are typically in the hospital for a very long time. They can sit in an ICU for a very long time, which is very expensive real estate within a hospital. And they have been a challenge for the entire industry to get off the ventilator permanently and moved in through the continuum of care. So it was founded 32 years ago.
And then, so your organization is a specialist in this niche.
Yes. In fact, we're the only specialists in this niche.
Now, why is it something that the hospital staff can't handle?
So these patients typically start in an ICU, and ICU stands for intensive care unit, as we all know. And the idea in an intensive care unit is to help the patient survive. It's not about rehabilitation. It's simply about survival and stabilization. So patients don't typically rehabilitate in the ICU. And so we are a step down level of care from ICU. And we have a model of care that allows us to really laser focus on just this patient population. Whereas an ICU, it could be a neuro ICU or a medical ICU or post-surgical ICU. But a trach vent patient requires a very different approach. And any one of those ICUs, you may have one trach vent patient. But in our step-down unit, we take all of the trach vent patients, and we get to laser focus on that patient population.
So then you're taking the patient out of the hospital into your facility?
No, we work with the hospital in the hospital. So we operate inside the hospital. We have a unit within the hospital, but we operate inside the hospital.
Now, do you work in hospitals all over South Florida or just in a handful of hospitals?
So the closest unit we have to South Florida is Tampa General Hospital. We are not currently in South Florida.
So you're based in South Florida, but your operations, you're working around the country?
Yes, it is our corporate home.
And then, so why are some hospitals open to this and others hesitant?
The model of care is very uniquely. Many hospitals are not familiar with it. There is a model of care called a long-term acute care hospital, which is actually a standalone facility. Hospitals can discharge those patients to those hospitals. The results have not been fantastic in those hospitals for this particular patient population. They have a role to play in our industry, but trach vent patients, Lee, they've been a problem in the ICU. They've been a problem in LTACs. I have not seen anybody who provides the outcomes for patients that we do.
Now, is what makes you different? Is it your personnel, your training? Do you have technology that makes you different?
People ask us our secret sauce all the time. What I tell them is we have so many ingredients to the secret sauce that it's really difficult to pinpoint any one. Yes. Do we have personnel that is allowed to? This is a key point. We allow our personnel to practice through the entire scope of their professional training. if you ask many respiratory therapists what they get to do, they have so many patients to see on a daily basis, and they have to travel throughout the hospital typically to see them. So there's a lot of windshield time. So by the time they get to the patient, they don't get to, again, practice through the entire scope of their professional training. On our unit, we don't have a respiratory therapist coming from all over the hospital. They are dedicated to our unit. And by the way, I'm talking about respiratory therapy, but it's really all of the disciplines. So we get to work together as a small group, a small team, and we get to really, again, practice the entire scope of our professional training. That's such an important piece, and it's often overlooked. When you have people that don't get to practice through the entire scope, they don't get the level of satisfaction in their job that they do on our unit. So the satisfiers on our unit, not pay, not, it's the hours are long, the patients are hard, but it's really the ability to work as a team member, and through the entire scope of their professional training.
Now, why do you think it's important for hospitals to invest in something like this and have a dedicated ventilator care unit and staff there in their facility?
Well, everywhere I go in the country, I look at the statistics for these patients. And anywhere I go, Lee, the statistics are bad. There isn't a single place in the country that handles this patient population as well as the results that we're providing on a daily basis. Now, we're not for everybody. If you have a very, very young, healthy population, I will give you an example. We were asked to quote some business in Utah. And frankly, there weren't enough of this patient population to make one of our units viable. But then we looked in markets where there's either a large population density or a large enough population density of elderly. And there's just so many of these patients. So it's not for everybody. We would never go to probably North Dakota because there just isn't enough volume there for us to make sense. But in the markets where we provide care, we are doing so in a manner that provides better care for the patient. It saves the hospital money, and it improves some really key statistics for them. And that's length of stay and quality metrics, which are huge in hospital reimbursement.
So what are some of those clues that a hospital that isn't partnering with you, what are some of the symptoms they're having where TriVent may be able to be a good partner and a good solution for them?
Sure. Very, very simple. The length of stay for this patient population, they'll see it climbing and high. The readmission rate, meaning the rate at which they discharge a patient and they come right back to the hospital for the same disease, that is another indicator. And then lastly, their internal ventilator liberation percentage. The national average for ventilator liberation is about 60%. We consistently have been providing ventilator liberation at 86%. In fact, the next level of success, if you will, after you wean the patient or liberate the patient from the ventilator, is to decannulate them, remove that cannula from their throat. And we're doing that at a rate that exceeds 60%. So we're decannulating patients at a rate in excess of the national average for ventilator liberation. So anywhere where there's population density, we see that the length of stay for this patient population is super high. And anywhere that happens, we can be of assistance.
Now, what is like kind of the onboarding and the transition to partner with you look like? Because a lot of folks, this type of change management, might be a bridge too far for some people. Can you talk about what it feels like to go, a before and after when you're working with TriVent?
Sure. I mean, we're fairly turnkey. We provide most of the resources for our own unit. One key thing is we do not provide the physicians. We allow the physicians in the hospital to do what they do best. So we partner with the physicians in the hospital. We provide all of the other staffing and incremental care in the unit. And it's, again, it takes about 4 to 6 months to stand one of our units up, but it's fairly turnkey. We do a lot of the heavy lifting on our end.
Is there any a story you can share about kind of a problem that one of the hospitals had, then you came in and you helped them get maybe to a better place?
Yeah, so I could very easily share one story. There was a patient. She was a bilateral lung transplant patient. And she had been discharged to LTAC 2 times and readmitted both times to the hospital. She had failed to wean from the ventilator a number of times, but all in, Lee, she had been hospitalized for over 3 years. I want to let that sit. 3 years in the hospital. So we had gotten a shot at her. They sent her over to us. And frankly, we were able to wean her off the ventilator in 32 days. After 3 years of being hospitalized, she got off the ventilator, spent a couple weeks in inpatient rehab after that, and then she got to go home. Now, I love that story because it shows the high end of the spectrum of what we can do. But the reality is there's not a lot of bilateral lung transplant patients out there. What we love is the little everyday stories. We've got dozens of them. But we had a NHRA hot rod motorcycle driver. His crew chief came down with COVID, and then ultimately had to be trached and on the ventilator. And we helped save his life. We got to participate in that. That team went on to build one of the third fastest motorcycle engine in history, and actually gave us a duplicate of one of their trophies after they won a race, and they brought it back to our unit. And that was really cool. But the other piece is I like to tell the stories, like, for example, that we mentioned Tampa General. Their CEO, in a recent article written, he expressed that we saved them in fiscal 21. We saved them $2.3 million. Now, we know hospitals are really taking it on the chin right now. Financials are really, really at risk. So when we can help save a hospital $2.3 million, that's meaningful. And those are all stories I love to tell.
Now, you mentioned COVID. Were the hospitals that had you there, was that a big help for them to kind of go through that period of crisis?
Yeah. We're proud to be part of the COVID response in our hospitals. We were able to take post-COVID patients and wean them off the ventilator. I told you that our liberation percentage is about 86%. Frankly, with COVID patients, it was over 90%. We had great success getting COVID patients off the ventilator. And that's when, by the way, everybody was telling you that if you went on the ventilator with COVID, it was going to be a bad outcome. But we had amazing success with that patient population. At one point during one of the peaks, we were actually called on by one of our hospitals. And they said, look, we don't need a ventilator weaning unit right now. What we really need is a COVID unit. And so we told our team, hey, we're going to transition for a period of time. And for 6 weeks, we became an extension of a COVID unit for the hospital. And then when the 6 weeks were up and the latest surge died down, we went back to doing what we do. But during COVID, we all needed to be good partners. And so we did what we needed to do.
So what do you need more of? How can we help you? Like, do you need more hospitals? You need more folks to work there? How can we help you?
Well, I'll tell you, we have, there's plenty of patients, both in South Florida and throughout the country that need this care, and they're not getting it. They're not getting it in South Florida. When we would love to be able to provide it, and where our corporate home is, right? I live in South Florida, and we're looking forward to partnering with some hospitals in this market and others.
So who in the hospital do you need to talk to?
Oh, goodness. Anybody in the C-suite, frankly, whether it's the CEO, the chief medical officer is typically a huge fan of what we do because they see the quality metrics and the outcomes. The chief financial officer can identify what, the dollars that we're going to save them or make them. So really anybody in the C-suite is an appropriate in for us.
And then you said it's in hospitals and areas where there's an elderly population. That's kind of the sweet spot for you?
Either a large elderly population or a super large population density. I'll give you an example. New York City, for example, there are over 8,000 trach vent patients in New York City alone every year. That's just a huge number.
So if somebody wants to learn more, have a more substantive conversation with you or somebody on the team, what's the website?
Yeah, it is TriVent TriVentHealthcare.com. TriVent, not Trident. TriVentHealthcare.com.
That's TriVent healthcare.com.
Yes, sir.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for sharing your story today. You're doing such important work, and we appreciate you.
Hey, Lee, I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
All right, this is Lee Cantor. We'll see you all next time on South Florida Business Radio.